Emma sat by the window of her Boston home watching the rain tap against the glass. The sound should have been calming, but tonight it only made the silence in her house feel louder. Her husband Daniel was still at the office. He had promised he would be home early, but she had heard that line many times before. 10 years of marriage had brought stability, but it had also brought distance. Their love was still there, but it felt quieter, buried beneath work schedules, responsibilities, and the passing of time. Emma often told herself this was normal, that all marriages grew comfortable. But deep down she longed for something more, something she couldn't name. That night she had a charity event to attend. She had almost decided not to go, but the thought of spending another evening alone convinced her otherwise. Emma dressed simply, slipping into a navy dress and light coat. She wasn't looking for attention. She only wanted a reason to step out of the stillness that had settled around her life. The event was lively, filled with soft music, clinking glasses, and people who seemed to know exactly how to smile at the right moment. Emma tried to blend in, offering polite greetings, but she never quite felt at home in such places. She was moving toward the refreshment table when her eyes caught someone across the room, a man laughing warmly in the middle of a small circle. His presence stood out, not because he was the loudest, but because he carried a kind of ease that drew people in. That was Marcus. Tall, confident, with a deep, steady voice that carried even when he spoke softly. He had recently moved to Boston from Atlanta, though Emma did not know that yet. What she noticed first was not his story, but the way he seemed present, as if every person he spoke to mattered. It was a quality she hadn't felt directed at her in a long time. They crossed paths near the coffee table. When both reached for the last cup, their hands brushed lightly, and Emma pulled back quickly, offering an awkward smile. "Sorry, you take it," she said. Marcus shook his head. "Ladies first," he replied with a smile that was warm rather than practiced. She thanked him and turned away. But something about his voice stayed with her later in the evening. As she prepared to leave, she found herself unexpectedly beside him again. The rain had grown heavier outside, and people hesitated at the door, waiting for it to calm. Emma sighed, realizing she had left her umbrella in the car. Marcus noticed. "Did you bring one?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, looks like I'll just have to make a run for it." Without hesitation, he held out his umbrella. "Here, take mine." Emma blinked, surprised. "I can't do that." "Then you'll be stuck in the rain." "I don't mind," he said simply, his tone carrying no expectation. "Besides, you look like you'd rather not ruin your evening dress." She hesitated, then accepted. "Thank you. That's very kind." As she stepped out into the wet night, she felt a strange spark inside her chest. It wasn't about the umbrella, it was about being noticed. It had been so long since someone had paid attention in such a small but thoughtful way at home. Emma leaned the umbrella by the door and stared at it for a moment. Daniel wasn't back yet. The house was quiet, the clock ticking steadily in the background. She changed into comfortable clothes, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. His laughter, his voice, and the way he had handed her the umbrella without a second thought. She didn't know why it lingered, but it did. Days passed, and Emma tried to push the memory away. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Daniel leaving early, Emma handling the household, evenings spent waiting. But something had shifted. She caught herself wondering about the man she had met. Who was he? What had brought him to the city? Why did that brief encounter feel so different from everything else in her life? Fate seemed to answer. A week later, she saw him again, this time at the local bookstore cafe where she often went to spend her quiet afternoons. Marcus was there, reading at a corner table, his expression relaxed. Emma almost turned away, unsure if she should approach, but he looked up at that exact moment. Recognition flashed across his face, and he smiled. "You're the umbrella lady," he said lightly as she walked closer. Emma laughed softly, her cheeks warming. "I guess I am. And you're the man who probably caught a cold because of me." "No cold," Marcus replied. "But I did wonder if I'd ever get that umbrella back." She smiled and nodded. "It's sitting by my front door. I kept meaning to return it. Then I'll have to trust you to bring it here sometime," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Unless you're busy. She hesitated, then sat down. The conversation that followed surprised her. It wasn't about weather or polite small talk. Marcus asked her about her favorite books, her hobbies, her writing, which she hadn't spoken of in years. He really listened in a way that made her feel both comfortable and unsettled. Hours slipped away before she realized how long she had stayed. Walking home that evening, Emma felt lighter than she had in a long time. But with that lightness came confusion. She told herself it was harmless, just a kind stranger who had shown her kindness. Yet deep inside, she knew the feeling was stronger than that. When Daniel finally came home that night, late as usual, Emma greeted him with a smile. He kissed her forehead distractedly before heading straight to his study, papers in hand. Emma stood in the hallway, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing through the house. Her gaze shifted to the umbrella still leaning by the door. For the first time, she wondered if it was more than just an umbrella. It was the start of something she hadn't seen coming. And as the rain returned that night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart whispering questions she wasn't ready to answer. Emma woke early the next morning, but her thoughts weren't on her usual routine. Instead, she kept replaying the conversation with Marcus at the cafe. His laughter, the way his questions carried real curiosity, the calm tone of his voice, it had all stayed with her. It was rare for anyone to listen to her so closely. She had forgotten how it felt to be heard, to have someone's full attention without distraction. Daniel cared for her in his own way, but lately his life was wrapped up in deadlines, client meetings, and late-night phone calls. Emma didn't blame him, but she couldn't deny the emptiness it left. 2 days later, she returned to the same bookstore cafe, telling herself it was just her usual spot. She carried the umbrella with her, neatly folded, as if that would excuse her reason for going. She almost convinced herself she wasn't expecting to see him, but when she spotted Marcus in the corner again, reading with a coffee cup by his side, her heart reacted before her mind could catch up. This time, he noticed her first. He lifted his head, smiled, and waved her over. "I was beginning to think you'd never come back," he teased as she approached. Emma held up the umbrella. "I came to return this," she said, setting it on the table. Marcus chuckled. "Then I guess I should thank the rain for bringing us together." The comment made her cheeks warm, though his tone was light and playful. She sat down, telling herself she would stay only for a few minutes. But minutes turned into an hour, and the hour stretched until she lost track of time. They spoke about everything: books, music, cities they loved, childhood memories. Emma found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years. And every laugh seemed to pull her further into a space she hadn't known she needed. From that day, coffee became their quiet ritual. Once or twice a week, Emma found herself at the cafe. Sometimes with the excuse of needing a break, sometimes with no excuse at all. And every time Marcus was there, she didn't ask whether he planned it or whether it was chance. She only knew that she looked forward to those afternoons more than anything else. Marcus had a way of speaking that made the world around them fade. When he asked questions, it wasn't out of politeness. It was because he wanted to know. He asked about her writing, something she had long abandoned after marriage and responsibilities took over. She confessed how she once dreamed of publishing short stories, but life had carried her elsewhere. He leaned forward, eyes bright. "Then why not write again?" he asked. "You still have the words in you." No one had told her that in years. The thought alone stirred something she thought she had lost out at home. However, she said nothing about Marcus. When Daniel asked how her day had been, she simply smiled and said, "Was fine." She hid the details, the laughter, the spark. She felt guilty for keeping it from him, but at the same time, she wasn't ready to let it go. It felt like she had discovered a part of herself that had been asleep. And Marcus was the one who had woken it. One rainy afternoon, they left the cafe together. The streets were crowded, umbrellas bobbing like flowers in the wind. Marcus walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He noticed she hadn't brought her umbrella this time. "You didn't learn your lesson?" he asked with a grin. Emma laughed. "Maybe I was hoping you'd rescue me again." He tilted his head. "Maybe I was hoping the same thing." The air between them grew heavier than before. charged with something unspoken. Emma's heart raced as they continued walking. For a moment, the noise of the city faded, and all she could feel was his presence beside her. At the corner, they paused. Marcus gently reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture was simple, yet it sent a shiver through her. His hand lingered just slightly, as if asking a silent question. Emma froze, caught between the warmth of the moment and the voice of reason that warned her she was married. She stepped back, forcing a smile. "I should head home," she said softly. Marcus didn't press. He only nodded, his eyes holding hers with a depth she couldn't ignore. "Good night, Emma." That night she lay awake next to Daniel, who was already asleep, exhausted from another long day. Emma stared at the ceiling, her mind full of Marcus's words, his laughter, the way his touch had felt against her skin. She hated herself for thinking about him, yet she couldn't stop. The truth was clear now. This was no longer just harmless friendship. The days that followed were filled with conflict inside her. She tried to convince herself to stay away, to focus on her marriage, but every time she walked past the cafe, she slowed down, hoping to see him. And when she did, when their eyes met across the room, she always walked in. One evening as they sat together, Emma finally admitted what she had been avoiding. "This feels wrong," she whispered, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "I shouldn't be here with you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Emma, I don't want to make your life harder. I didn't plan for this to happen. But the truth is, I look forward to seeing you more than I should." Her heart thudded at his words. She wanted to deny her feelings, but deep down, she knew they matched his. She felt alive with him, seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The guilt and the joy tangled together, pulling her in two directions. When she returned home that evening, Daniel was sitting on the couch, papers scattered around him. He looked up briefly, offered a tired smile, then returned to his work. Emma stood there silently, staring at him. He was her husband, the man she had built a life with, the man who had once been her entire world. But something had shifted. She still loved him, but her heart was no longer only his. She walked to the kitchen, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring out at the night sky. Her chest ached with the weight of her secret. She had not yet crossed a line, but she was standing dangerously close to it. And she knew that the longer this went on, the harder it would be to step back in her mind. She could still hear Marcus's words, "I look forward to seeing you more than I should." Emma closed her eyes, torn between guilt and longing. She knew her life was no longer simple, and she couldn't deny the truth any longer. Something had begun between them, something fragile, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. And with every secret coffee, every shared laugh, every look that lingered too long, the line she swore she wouldn't cross kept moving closer. The weeks turned into months, and Emma found herself living in two separate worlds. By day, she was Daniel's wife, calm, supportive, managing the home with quiet devotion. By night, in the hidden corners of Boston, she was simply Emma, laughing, dreaming, walking under the city lights with Marcus. The contrast was sharp, and the weight of the secret pressed heavier on her heart with every passing day. They never made plans in advance, yet somehow they always found each other. A chance text, a quick call, or an unspoken agreement brought them together. Sometimes they met at the cafe, sometimes they walked along the river, and sometimes they just sat in his car talking for hours with music playing softly in the background. The city seemed different when she was with him, alive, glowing, full of possibilities. Emma told herself it was only companionship, but the truth was far more complicated. Marcus had become the place where she felt alive again. He was the one who asked how her day truly was. The one who noticed when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The one who pushed her to remember her forgotten dreams. Every night she spent with him felt like a confession not only to him, but to herself. One evening, as they strolled through the park, Marcus stopped walking and looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to be honest with you. I never meant for this to happen. But I can't keep pretending this is just friendship. I've fallen for you." Her breath caught. She had felt the truth in the spaces between their conversations. In the way his eyes lingered on her, in the way her own heart raced whenever he was near. But hearing it spoken aloud shook her. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "You can't say that, but it's true," he said, stepping closer. "And I think you feel it too." She looked away, tears threatening to rise. She wanted to deny it, to claim she was stronger than this, but the truth was written all over her face. She did feel it. She felt it every time she left him. Every time she walked into her silent house and wished her life were different. That night, Emma returned home later than usual. Daniel was asleep on the couch again, the glow of his laptop still on. She stood there, watching him, her chest tightening with guilt. She remembered the man she had married, the man who once surprised her with flowers, who once drove hours just to see her smile, who once looked at her the way Marcus did now. The love was still there, buried beneath years of responsibility and exhaustion. But it wasn't enough to stop her from longing for what she had found with someone else. The next time she saw Marcus, she tried to end it. They were sitting in his car by the harbor, the water shimmering under the streetlights. "We can't keep doing this," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "I'm married. This isn't fair to anyone." Marcus didn't argue. He only nodded slowly, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "I know. But tell me, Emmy, this was only about fairness. Why does it hurt so much to let go?" Her eyes filled with tears. She had no answer because the hurt was real. She felt torn in two, caught between the life she had built and the life she secretly longed for. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing, while her mind replayed Marcus's words. Why does it hurt so much to let go? She wanted to believe it was just loneliness, just a phase that would pass. But deep down, she knew it was more. The next week, she didn't go to the cafe. She avoided the bookstore, the park, all the places where she might see him. She tried to bury herself in her marriage, cooking dinner, asking Daniel about his day, trying to bridge the distance. Daniel appreciated her efforts, but his attention was still divided. His work was relentless, his mind always elsewhere. When he smiled at her, it was kind but distracted. One Friday night, as she sat alone on the porch, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "I know you're trying to do the right thing. But Emma, I miss you." She stared at the message, her heart racing. Her hand trembled as she typed back, then erased the words, then typed again. Finally, she wrote only, "I miss you too." That confession opened the door again. Within days, they met at the cafe. The moment she saw him, all her promises to herself dissolved. His smile, his presence. The comfort of being with him was too much to resist. They began meeting more often, sometimes late at night. They would walk through quiet streets, share stories, laugh softly, and sit close enough that words were no longer needed. Emma told herself they were only talking, only sharing time, but in her heart she knew it was love. It wasn't physical, it wasn't reckless, it was emotional. And that made it even harder to deny. One evening, as they sat on a park bench under the city lights, Marcus spoke again. "Emma, I don't want to be your secret. I want to be the one you come home to. But I also know you're not ready to give that up. So tell me, what do we do?" Emma's heart broke at the question. She didn't know the answer. All she knew was that she couldn't imagine her life without him anymore. She wiped at her tears, whispering, "I don't know, Marcus. I just don't know." That night, when she returned home, she found Daniel waiting for her at the kitchen table. He looked tired but curious. "You've been out late a lot lately," he said gently. "Is everything okay?" Emma froze, her heart pounding. She forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Yes, just meeting friends. I needed a change of pace." Daniel accepted her answer without pressing further, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Emma turned away, hiding the storm inside her as she lay in bed later. She realized the truth. She was living two lives, and sooner or later they would collide. Her secret nights with Marcus were no longer just escapes. They were her reality. And the longer she kept it hidden, the closer she came to losing everything. Emma closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She loved her husband. She loved Marcus. But love had never felt so heavy, so impossible, so full of consequence. And in the silence of the night, she wondered which truth would break, first her secret or her heart. The weight of Emma's secret grew heavier with every passing day. What had begun as harmless meetings had become something she could no longer deny. Marcus had become part of her life in ways Daniel no longer was. The guilt burned inside her, but so did the longing. Every time she tried to step away, she found herself pulled back, as if her heart had already made a choice her mind refused to accept. One cold autumn evening, Emma and Marcus sat in his car parked by the harbor. The city lights reflected on the water, shimmering like restless stars. They had spent hours talking, their conversations weaving between laughter and silence. But tonight the quiet felt different, charged, expectant. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "Emma, we can't keep living like this. I can't keep being the shadow in your life. Don't we deserve honesty?" Emma looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. Her throat tightened. "Honesty will destroy everything," she whispered, "but silence is destroying you." Marcus replied gently, "Every time you leave, I see it. You walk back into a life that no longer fits you. And every time, I wonder how long you can carry that weight." Tears welled in her eyes. He was right, but saying it aloud made the truth unbearable. "I love my husband," she said, almost as if to remind herself. Marcus leaned closer. "I know you do. But you also love me. And that's the part neither of us can keep pretending away." Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to deny it, to claim this was only infatuation, only loneliness filling the gaps of her marriage. But she couldn't. The love she felt for Marcus was real, undeniable, and it terrified her. That night, when Emma returned home, she found Daniel awake in the living room. Papers were spread across the table, but his eyes were on her the moment she walked in. "You're late again?" he said softly, not accusing, but concerned. Emma froze, searching for an excuse, but the words caught in her throat. "I lost track of time," she muttered. Daniel studied her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then he sighed and turned back to his work. "I miss how things used to be," he said quietly. Emma's chest ached. She wanted to say something to bridge the distance between them, but the words never came. She climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her heart torn between the man she had promised her life to and the man who had reminded her how to feel alive. The following week, Emma tried to avoid Marcus. She ignored his texts, skipped the cafe, and buried herself in housework. But each night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his voice echoing in her mind. "Don't we deserve honesty?" The truth gnawed at her until she couldn't bear it anymore. One evening, she found herself walking to the park where they had often met. Marcus was already there, as if he knew she would come. When their eyes met, Emma's resolve crumbled. She walked straight to him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I tried to stay away," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't. I don't know what to do anymore." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. "You don't have to decide tonight," he whispered. "But you can't keep living like this. You're hurting yourself." In his embrace, Emma felt both comfort and fear. She knew he was right. A choice had to be made. But whichever path she chose, something precious would be lost. Days turned into restless nights, and the pressure grew unbearable. Daniel began noticing her distraction more, his questions sharper, his eyes searching hers for answers she couldn't give. Emma avoided them, afraid that if she met his gaze too long, he would see the truth. Finally, one night, Daniel confronted her. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the house silent around them. "Emma," he said, his voice low but firm, "are you seeing someone else?" Her heart stopped. The words hung in the air like thunder. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the lie wouldn't come. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I never meant for this to happen." Daniel closed his eyes, the pain clear on his face. "So it's true." Emma broke down, her body trembling. "I still love you." "I do, but I can't ignore what's happening." I don't know how to stop it." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Daniel sat motionless, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Finally, he rose and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears. That night, Emma felt the full weight of her choices. She had broken the fragile trust of her marriage, and there was no going back to the life she once knew. She stood at a crossroads between the man who had been her partner for a decade and the man who had awakened her heart in ways she never expected. The next day, she met Marcus again, this time not with laughter, but with the gravity of a woman facing a choice that could change everything. "Daniel knows," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her with a mix of concern and hope. "Then maybe this is the moment, Emma. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." Emma shook her head, tears brimming again. "It's not that simple. I can't just walk away from my marriage, from everything we've built. But I can't imagine my life without you either." Marcus reached for her hands. "Then you need to decide what life you want. Not for me, not for Daniel, for you. Because living between two worlds will only break you apart." His words struck deep. Emma knew he was right. She could no longer keep balancing on the fragile line between love and loyalty. The time had come to choose. That evening, Emma stood at her bedroom window, watching the city lights in the distance. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, older, heavier, but also more awake than ever. She thought about Daniel, about the years they had shared, the promises they had made. She thought about Marcus, about the spark, the laughter, the hope of something new. Her heart whispered of passion while her conscience screamed of loyalty. No matter which path she took, she knew life would never be the same again. And as the night deepened, Emma realized that love, in its most honest form, was not just about choosing who she wanted, it was about choosing who she was willing to become.